The United States House of Representatives is one of the two houses of the United States Congress alongside the Senate. The composition and powers of the House are established in Article 1 of the United States Constitution. The major power of the House is to pass federal legislation that affects the entire country, although its bills must also be passed by the Senate and further agreed to by the U.S. President before becoming law. The House has some exclusive powers: the power to initiate revenue bills, to impeach officials, and to elect the U.S. President in case there is no majority in the Electoral College. Each U.S. state is represented in the House in proportion to its population as measured in the census, but every state is entitled to at least one representative. The most populous state, California, currently has 53 representatives. On the other end of the spectrum, there are 7 states with only one representative each. The total number of voting representatives is fixed by law at 435. In addition, there are 6 non-voting representatives who have a voice on the floor and a vote in committees, but no vote on the floor. The Speaker of the House, who presides over the chamber, is elected by the members of the House, and is therefore traditionally the leader of the House Democratic Caucus of the House Republican Conference, whichever party has more voting members. The House meets in the South Wing of the United States Capitol. History. Under the Articles of Confederation, the Congress of the Confederation was a unicameral body in which each state was equally represented, and in which each state had a veto over most action. After 8 years of a more limited confederal government under the Articles, numerous political leaders, such as James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, initiated the Constitutional Convention in 1787, which received the Confederation Congress's sanction to amend the Articles of Confederation. All states except Rhode Island agreed to send delegates. The issue of how to structure a Congress was one of the most divisive among the founders during the convention. Edmund Randolph's Virginia plan called for a bicameral Congress. The lower house would be of the people, elected directly by the people of the United States and representing public opinion, and a more deliberative upper house that would represent the individual states, and would be less susceptible to variations of mass sentiment, would be elected by the lower house. The House is referred to as the lower house, with the Senate being the upper house. Although the United States Constitution does not use the terminology, both houses' approval is necessary for the passage of legislation. The Virginia plan drew the support of delegates from large states such as Virginia, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, as it called for representation based on population. The smaller states, however, favored the New Jersey plan, which called for a unicameral Congress with equal representation for the states. Eventually, the convention reached the Connecticut Compromise, or the Great Compromise, under which one house of Congress would provide representation proportional to each state's population, whereas the other would provide equal representation amongst the states. The Constitution was ratified by the requisite number of states in 1788, but its implementation was set for March 4, 1789. The House began work on April 1, 1789, when it achieved a quorum for the first time. During the first half of the 19th century, the House was frequently in conflict with the Senate over regionally divisive issues, including slavery. The North was much more populous than the South, and therefore dominated the House of Representatives. However, the North held no such advantage in the Senate, where the equal representation confederation of states prevail. Regional conflict was most pronounced over the issue of slavery. One example of a provision repeatedly supported by the House but blocked by the Senate was the Wilmot Proviso, which sought to ban slavery in the land gained during the Mexican-American War. Conflict over slavery and other issues persisted until the Civil War, which began soon after several Southern states attempted to secede from the Union. The war culminated in the South's defeat and in the abolition of slavery. Because all Southern senators except Andrew Johnson resigned the seats at the beginning of the war, the Senate did not have the balance of power between North and South during the war. The years of Reconstruction that followed witnessed large majorities for the Republican Party, which many Americans associated with the Union's victory in the Civil War and the ending of slavery. The Reconstruction period ended in about 1877. The ensuing era, known as the Gilded Age, was marked by sharp political divisions in the electorate. The Democratic and the Republican Party held majorities in the House at various times. The late 19th and early 20th centuries also saw a dramatic increase in the power of the Speaker of the House. The rise of the Speaker's influence began in the 1890s, during tenure of Republican Thomas Brackett Reed. Czar Reed, as he was nicknamed, attempted to put into effect his view that the best system is to have one party govern and the other party watch. The leadership structure of the House also developed during approximately the same period, with the positions of Majority Leader and Minority Leader being created in 1899. While the Minority Leader was the head of the Minority Party, the Majority Leader remained subordinate to the Speaker. The Speakership reached its zenith during the term of Republican Joseph Gurney Cannon, 1903 to 1911. The powers of the Speaker included chairmanship of the influential Rules Committee and the ability to appoint members of other House committees. These powers, however, were curtailed in the Revolution of 1910 because of the efforts of Democrats and dissatisfied Republicans who opposed Cannon's arguably heavy-handed tactics. The Democratic Party dominated the House of Representatives during the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, often winning over two-thirds of the seats. Both Democrats and Republicans were in power at various times during the next decade. The Democratic Party maintained control of the House from 1955 until 1995. In the mid-1970s, there were major reforms of the House, strengthening the power of subcommittees at the expense of committee chairs and allowing party leaders to nominate committee chairs. These actions were taken to undermine the seniority system, and to reduce the ability of a small number of senior members to obstruct legislation they did not favor. There was also a shift from the 1990s to greater control of the legislative program by the majority party. The power of party leaders grew considerably. The Republicans took control of the House in 1995, under the leadership of Speaker Newt Gingrich. Gingrich attempted to pass a major legislative program, the Contract with America, on which the House Republicans had been elected, and made major reforms of the House, notably reducing the tenure of committee chairs to 3 two-year terms. Many elements of the contract did not pass Congress, were vetoed by President Bill Clinton, or were substantially altered in negotiations with Clinton. The Republicans held on to the House until 2006, when the Democrats won control and Nancy Pelosi was subsequently elected by the House as the first female Speaker. The Republicans retook the House in 2011, the largest shift of power since the 1930s. Membership, qualifications and apportionment. Apportionment under Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. Seats in the House of Representatives are apportioned among the states by population, as determined by the census conducted every 10 years. Each state, however, is entitled to at least one representative. The only constitutional rule relating to the size of the House states, "The number of representatives shall not exceed one for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least one representative." Congress regularly increased the size of the House to account for population growth until it fixed the number of voting House members at 435 in 1911. The number was temporarily increased to 437 in 1959 upon the admission of Alaska and Hawaii, and returned to 435 4 years later, after the reapportionment consequent to the 1960 census. The Constitution does not provide for the representation of the District of Columbia or of territories. The District of Columbia and the territories of Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands are each represented by one non-voting delegate. Puerto Rico elects a resident commissioner, but other than having a 4-year term, the resident commissioner's role is identical to the delegates from the other territories. The 5 delegates and resident commissioner may participate in debates. Prior to 2011, they were also allowed to vote in committees and the Committee of the Whole when the votes would not be decisive. Redistricting states that are entitled to more than one representative are divided into single-member districts. This has been a federal statutory requirement since 1967. Prior to that law, general ticket representation was used by some states. States typically redraw district boundaries after each census, though they may do so at other times, such as the 2003 Texas redistricting. Each state determines its own district boundaries, either through legislation or through non-partisan panels. Malapportionment is unconstitutional and districts must be approximately equal in population. Additionally, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 prohibits redistricting plans that are intended to, or have the effect of, discriminating against racial or language minority voters. Aside from malapportionment and discrimination against racial or language minorities, federal courts have allowed state legislatures to engage in gerrymandering for the benefit of political parties or incumbents. In a 1984 case, Davis v. Bantima, the Supreme Court held that gerrymandered districts could be struck down on the basis of the Equal Protection Clause, but the court did not articulate a standard for when districts are impermissibly gerrymandered. However, the court overruled Davis in 2004 in Vyeth v. Jubilee, and court precedent currently holds gerrymandering to be a political question. According to calculations made by Bert Neuborn using criteria set forth by the American Political Science Association, about 40 seats, less than 10% of the House membership, is chosen through a genuinely contested electoral process, given bipartisan gerrymandering. Qualifications. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution sets 3 qualifications for representatives. Each representative must be at least 25 years old, have been a citizen of the United States for the past 7 years, and be an inhabitant of the state they represent. Members are not required to live in the district they represent, but they traditionally do. The age and citizenship qualifications for representatives are less than those for senators. The constitutional requirements of Article 1, Section 2 for election to Congress are the maximum requirements that can be imposed on a candidate. Therefore, Article 1, Section 5, which permits each House to be the judge of the qualifications of its own members, does not permit either House to establish additional qualifications. Likewise, a state could not establish additional qualifications. Disqualification. Under the 14th Amendment, a federal estate officer who takes the requisite oath to support the Constitution, but later engages in rebellion or aids the enemies of the United States, is disqualified from becoming a representative. This post-Civil War provision was intended to prevent those who sided with the Confederacy from serving. However, disqualified individuals may serve if they gain the consent of two-thirds of both houses of Congress. Elections for representatives are held in every even-numbered year, on Election Day, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. By law, representatives must be elected from single-member districts. After a census is taken, the year ending in 2 is the first year in which elections for U.S. House districts are based on that census. In most states, major party candidates for each district are nominated in partisan primary elections, typically held in spring to late summer. In some states, the Republican and Democratic parties choose the respective candidates for each district in the political conventions in spring or early summer, which often use unanimous voice votes to reflect either confidence in the incumbent or the result of bargaining in earlier private discussions. Exceptions can result in so-called floor fight convention votes by delegates, with outcomes that can be hard to predict. Especially if a convention is closely divided, a losing candidate may contend further by meeting the conditions for a primary election. The courts generally do not consider ballot access rules for independent and third-party candidates to be additional qualifications for holding office, and there are no federal regulations regarding ballot access. As a result, the process to gain ballot access varies greatly from state to state, and, in the case of a third party, may be affected by results of previous year's elections. In 1967, the United States Congress passed the Uniform Congressional District Act, which requires almost all representatives be elected from single-member districts. Following the Wesbury v. Sanders decision, Congress was motivated by fears that courts would impose at-large plurality districts on states that did not redistrict to comply with the new mandates for districts roughly equal in population, and Congress also sought to prevent attempts by southern states to use such voting systems to dilute the vote of racial minorities. Several states have used multi-member districts in the past, although only 2 states used multi-member districts in 1967. Hawaii and Maine were made exempt from the Uniform Congressional District Act, and are free to use multi-member districts, although neither state chooses to do so. Louisiana is unique in that it holds an all-party primary election on the general election day, with a subsequent runoff election between the top 2 finishes if no candidate received a majority in the primary. The states of Washington and California now use a similar system to that used by Louisiana. Seats vacated during a term are filled through special elections, unless the vacancy occurs closer to the next general election date than a pre-established deadline. The term of a member chosen in a special election usually begins the next day, or as soon as the results are certified. Non-voting delegates. Additionally, Washington, D.C. and the 5 inhabited U.S. territories each elect a non-voting delegate. With the exception of the resident commissioner of Puerto Rico, each representative and delegate serves for a 2-year term. They have a voice on the floor, but cannot vote there. They have a voice and a vote on their committees. Terms. Representatives and delegates serve for 2-year terms, while the resident commissioner serves for 4 years. The Constitution permits the House to expel a member with a 2/3 vote. In the history of the United States, only 5 members have been expelled from the House. In 1861, 3 were removed for supporting the Confederate States' secession: John Bullock Clark, John William Reed, and Henry Cornelius Burnett. Michael Mayers was expelled after his criminal conviction for accepting bribes in 1980, and James Traficant was expelled in 2002 following his conviction for corruption. The House also has the power to formally censure or reprimand its members. Censure or reprimand of a member requires only a simple majority, and does not remove that member from office. Comparison to the Senate. As a check on the regional, popular, and rapidly changing politics of the House, the Senate has several distinct powers. For example, the advice and consent powers are a sole Senate privilege. The House, however, has the exclusive power to initiate bills for raising revenue, to impeach officials, and to choose the president in the event that a presidential candidate fails to get a majority of the Electoral College votes. The Senate and House are further differentiated by term lengths and the number of districts represented. The Senate has longer terms of 6 years, fewer members, and larger constituencies per member. The Senate is informally referred to as the Upper House, and the House of Representatives as the Lower House. Salary and benefits. Salaries. As of December 2014, the annual salary of each representative is $174,000. The Speaker of the House and the majority and minority leaders earn more, $223,500 for the Speaker and $193,400 for the party leaders. A cost of living adjustment increase takes effect annually unless Congress votes to not accept it. Congress sets members' salaries, however. The 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits a change in salary from taking effect until after the next election of. The whole House of Representatives are eligible for retirement benefits after serving for 5 years. Outside pay is limited to 15% of congressional pay, and certain types of income involving a fiduciary responsibility or personal endorsement are prohibited. Titles. Representatives use the prefix "the Honorable" before the names. A member of the House is referred to as a representative, congressman, or congresswoman, while senators are members of Congress. The terms congressman and congresswoman are not generally used by them. Pension. All members of Congress are automatically enrolled in the Federal Employees Retirement System, a pension system also used for federal civil servants. They become eligible to receive benefits after 5 years of service. The FERS is composed of 3 elements: Social Security, the FERS Basic Annuity, a monthly pension plan based on the number of years of service and the average of the 3 highest years of basic pay. The Thrift Savings Plan, a 401(k) defined contribution plan for retirement account into which participants can deposit up to a maximum of $17,000 in 2012. Their employing agency matches employee contributions up to 5% of pay. Members of Congress may retire with full benefits at age 62 after 5 years of service, at age 50 after 20 years of service, and at any age after 25 years of service. They may retire with reduced benefits at ages 55 to 59 after 5 years of service. Depending on birth year, they may receive a reduced pension after 10 years of service if they are between 55 years and 57 years of age. Tax deductions. Members of Congress are permitted to deduct up to $3,000 of living expenses per year incurred while living away from the district or home state health benefits. Prior to 2014, members of Congress and the staff had access to essentially the same health benefits as federal civil servants. They could voluntarily enroll in the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, an employer-sponsored health insurance program, and were eligible to participate in other programs, such as the Federal Flexible Spending Account Program. However, Section 1312 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act provided that the only health plans that the federal government can make available to members of Congress and certain congressional staff are those created under the ACA or offered through a health care exchange. The Office of Personnel Management promulgated a final rule to comply with Section 1312. Under the rule, effective January 1, 2014, members and designated staff are no longer able to purchase FEHBP plans as active employees. However, if members enroll in a health plan offered through a Small Business Health Options Program exchange, they remain eligible for an employer contribution toward coverage, and members and designated staff who are eligible for retirement may enroll in a FEHBP plan upon retirement. The AGA and the final rule do not affect members or staffers' eligibility for Medicare benefits. The AGA and the final rule also do not affect members and staffers' eligibility for other health benefits related to federal employment. So current members and staff are eligible to participate in FSA-FEDS, the Federal Employees Dental and Vision Insurance Program, and the Federal Long-Term Care Insurance Program. There is an Office of the Attending Physician at the U.S. Capitol, which current members may seek health care from for an annual fee. The attending physician provides routine exams, consultations, and certain diagnostics, and may write prescriptions. The office does not provide vision or dental care. Current members may also receive medical and emergency dental care at military treatment facilities. There is no charge for outpatient care if it is provided in the National Capital Region, but members are billed at full reimbursement rates for inpatient care. Personnel, mail and office expenses. House members are eligible for a member's representational allowance to support them in their official and representational duties to their district. The MRA is calculated based on three components: one for personnel, one for official office expenses, and one for official or franked mail. The personnel allowance is the same for all members. The office and mail allowances vary based on the member's district's distance from Washington, D.C., the cost of office space in the member's district, and the number of non-business addresses in the district. These three components are used to calculate a single MRA that can fund any expense, even though each component is calculated individually. The franking allowance can be used to pay for personnel expenses if the member so chooses. In 2011, this allowance averaged $1.4 million per member and ranged from $1.35 to $1.67 million. The personnel allowance was $944,671 per member in 2010. Each member may employ no more than 18 permanent employees. Members' employees' salary is capped at $168,411 as of 2009. Travel allowance. Each member-elect and one staffer can be paid for one round trip between the home in their congressional district and Washington, D.C., for organization caucuses.